Landmark High Court decision has provided a major victory for a remote Aboriginal community in the Northern Territory. The court unanimously recognised the right of Santa Teresa community to sue their landlord. The landlord is the Territory government for providing substandard housing. Joining me now is their solicitor, Dan Kelly, from the Australian Lawyers for Remote Aboriginal Rights. Thanks so much for your time. So how significant is this?
Well, this is a significant decision. Essentially, what the court has done is confirm a new type of compensation that is available for tenants, and that is where tenants are left to live in premises that are dilapidated, that are broken down, and that causes them mental anguish. They're now able to be compensated for that injury.
Okay, so this sounds like a precedent-setting case.
Yes, indeed. It has set a precedent, and not only in the Northern Territory. The Residential Tenancy Act was the legislation under which these proceedings were brought. And that legislation and variations of that legislation are in every state and territory in Australia. So we believe it has implications well beyond the Northern Territory.
So how does the law actually view this? How can it be deemed that the Northern Territory did provide substandard accommodation? Is there any responsibility on the tenants for maintenance, if you like, if I can put it crudely?
Well, certainly. So the Residential Tenancy Act sets out the obligations of both landlords and tenants. Tenants have an obligation to keep their premises clean and up to date, and landlords have an obligation to carry out repairs and maintenance and ensure the premises are safe and habitable. And Santa Teresa has been bringing these legal actions since 2016. It's gone through many variations of court throughout the Northern Territory. And there's been several findings that the Northern Territory has failed to meet those very basic legal standards as landlord. Miss Young, who was the lead applicant in the matter before the High Court, she was left without a door on her premises for 5 years. We had other clients with overflowing sewerage into their properties inside their homes. We had clients left without air conditioning in the middle of the desert, meaning their houses were literally uninhabitable. This has gone on for years and years.
So what's the explanation from the landlord, the Territory government, for this going on for so long?
Well, the explanation, I believe, is there's been decades of neglect in these communities. The housing stock is old and significantly overcrowded. 54% of premises in these remote communities are overcrowded. And the Territory is essentially failing, I think, to keep up with demand. It hasn't built enough new housing for a number of years, and the overcrowding leads to the need for more repairs, and the Territory is simply unable to meet these standards.
When you say overcrowding, how many people, for example, are living in one home?
Oh, look, it wouldn't be unusual to find 15, 18 people living in a three-bedroom home. The overcrowding is severe.
How does that even work?
Well, it doesn't, I think, is the point. It has flow-on effects for the entire family, for employment opportunities, education. If kids can't get a decent night's sleep, it's hard for them to get up and go to school in the morning. If you speak to people out bush, this is the prominent issue in everyone's minds.
And I imagine that Santa Teresa isn't an isolated case?
No, certainly not. We don't just work in Santa Teresa. We're in communities right across the Northern Territory. And the conditions are identical, essentially the same. We also acted for, or continue to act for, a community called Laramba, exactly the same sorts of housing issues. They additionally had uranium in their drinking water. That again is a relatively common problem, not always uranium, but certainly minerals and other contaminants that are outside the Australian drinking water guidelines. These are quite common experiences in the remote north.
Right, Dan, so it sounds like, again, that you've won the battle but you haven't won the war. So there's been a legal victory, but life doesn't really change for these people in Santa Teresa and other communities. What happens next and how quickly does it happen?
Well, look, sadly, that's right. A legal victory doesn't change much on the ground. What we need to do now, and the next step in our legal proceedings, is we will go back to the Northern Territory Court of Appeal, where we will have an argument about the amount of compensation that should be payable. But to be clear, this isn't a battle about compensation. It's a battle about better housing. And our clients really seek better housing, and compensation is their only tool through which they can hold the government to account.
Well, Dan Kelly, thanks so much for giving us your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.